So I don't know about you guys, but I've been having very bleak visions of the future because I've been thinking a lot about AI taking jobs, and I've been thinking a lot about like the breaking point for society. Like what happens when people don't get jobs anymore? Like what happens when AI replaces us? Now, under a socialist system, you'd think that what AI would do is it would start with the most like taxing jobs, like physically, and the most necessary jobs. And what would happen is once AI could do those jobs for us, the person who did that job could either be reallocated to doing something more important for society that still needs a human touch, or in the far off future, those people just wouldn't really work anymore, right? So that is like the future that AI could promise us, but we do not live in a socialist world. We don't live even in a socialist country in the UK. We live in a capitalist one. So what happens when you lose your job under capitalism? Does the state provide for you? Does the state across the West give you free basic necessities, free food, free water, free energy, free homes? Does it provide for you? No, it doesn't. So what are your options? And let's say you're nowhere near retirement age that keeps extending. You're going back into a labour market to compete with younger people. So what happens to you? And I was thinking recently, there has to be like a breaking point where like some sort of universal basic income gets introduced, because if we're not gonna like really put regulations on capitalism properly, then that's gonna have to come. Because firstly, who is going to spend disposable income on consumer products that prop up the economy, and how will people even survive? But then I had another thought. So I was thinking like UBI has to become a thing at some stage, and I even made a video years ago, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, talking about UBI being a prop for consumer capitalism.
What my concern is that UBI is the last sort of desperate attempt to prop up the current consumer capitalist system, because like Andrew Yang says, what is UBI for essentially? So you have an extra £1,000 a month or $1,000, and what are you going to spend that on? So some people, they'll spend it on, I don't know, their rent, they'll spend it on necessities, but at the same time, where is the money mostly going to go? Probably private industries. People are going to spend it on, yeah, like shopping. People are going to spend it on goods, holidays. People are going to save it up for other things like cars. And what does this all contribute to? The current capitalist system that we're living in. At the current moment, 100 corporations emit 70+% of total CO2 emissions in the world, right? And we're not changing the system at the moment, and we're giving UBI to people to help prop up this system. In my opinion, it's sort of like a general subsidy for the capitalist industries.
So even if you were a capitalist, you would think maybe that's a good idea, because if, you know, AI takes people's jobs, people have less disposable income, isn't that going to tank economies around the world? But then I had another thought, and I was like, well, that's not going to happen. And then I started reading more about Klarna and other buy now, pay later apps. And then I started thinking about the gig economy. And then I've pieced it together in my head like, no, we're not going to live in a world where AI takes your job and you get UBI. We're going to live in a world where AI takes your job, you join the gig economy, and you use stuff like Klarna to pay for basic necessities. And even at the best of times in a capitalist system, you are a slave in some way to jobs or the bank and stuff if they own your house through a mortgage. You will actually just be a slave. You will always be in debt. There'll be no path to climbing any sort of class structure. You won't be able to make more money. You won't be able to actually achieve this dream the capitalists sold for you. You will actually be a slave. You will be a slave competing with everyone else in the rat race, not just at a normal job with actually good workers' rights. You'll be working in the gig economy, and your entire existence will be sustained using Klarna or other similar services. So I want to talk about this today because I know you guys all tune into my channel for like to cheer yourselves up about the state of the world, but this is just the future I'm seeing right now. And ironically, I'm going to show you a clip. The Klarna CEO, when talking about AI, says something like I was saying about like UBI and giving people income if they lose their job, which is really crazy to hear because I see him as part of the problem. But that's not going to happen. I'm right about many things in this channel. I'm also very humble, as people know as well. And I feel like I'm going to be right about this. Increasingly, what we're going to see is no worker protection, no workers' rights, and this gamified economic system like Uber Eats or Uber generally, and how much they're going to incentivize us to compete against each other just for the bare minimum, just for the scraps. And although right now we love looking down upon the people who do that labour, and you've seen the Labour government demonise refugees who do Uber Eats stuff, like it's the most scary, terrifying thing ever. But don't worry, everyone who looks down upon those workers, we'll be joining them soon. And even if it isn't delivering people's food, 0 hours contracts and a gig economy format, I predict, is going to be used for pretty traditional jobs, which usually have good workers' rights and good worker protection, because that's the way this death spiral of capitalism is going. And this is how you know capitalism is in its death spiral. The reality of capitalism is completely different to what we've been sold for the last 300 years, and it's going to continue to get worse. So all of that coming up for you today. If you want to support my work, speaking of capitalism, I'm a capitalist because I want money. Check out my Patreon, check out my YouTube memberships. And if you like this video, maybe leave a like at the end and maybe subscribe to my channel. So let's get into the video. Here is the capitalism you've been sold your whole life. So under capitalism, apparently the best and most ethical system in the world, not like scary socialism, which has killed 1 trillion billion, you're sold this meritocracy. Now, this is more like Western-centered capitalism, where you are in the imperial core and you enjoy the access to a mass array of consumer goods from all over the world. And America, obviously, even more than most countries. So you're sold, go to school, get a good education, go to university, get a degree, go work at the bottom rung of the corporate ladder, and throughout your career you will rise, your wages will keep getting better, and with your age and your status and growing in your professional career, you'll accumulate more capital, you might buy a house, you'll have your family, you can have a car, and sure, it's hard work, sure, you're going to have to work for that money, but if you work hard, you will have that house, you will have that white picket fence, you will have those nice cars, and maybe you can take your family on holiday twice a year, 3 times a year. You can buy your kids the latest consumer goods. You can buy nice food for them. You can buy treats for them. You can go out to eat at restaurants. You can go to the cinema. And life will just be pretty nice for you. Yes, you have to work hard, but you will be rewarded. Now, part of that is getting people absolutely addicted to overconsumption, which we are in the West. And now we're entering a time where people will have access to that overconsumption, but the dream of capitalism is essentially dead. For so many people in my generation and even younger, you're entering a job market which is terrible. Wages have not increased with inflation. The housing market is an absolute joke. So your situation is far more bleak. But what is different to your parents' generation and your grandparents' generation? Although you can't afford the basic necessities or even housing, you have access to overconsumption. You have access to mass consumption. And now what's making that even easier is apps like Klarna. So even if you don't have the financial means to even participate in overconsumption, well, now you do. Now it's easier than ever. And the way they even advertise these services is pretty bizarre as well. And you could say they're nothing new. People have been using credit cards for decades and decades. And all the problems you say about people overspending on Klarna, you could say that to credit cards as well. I want to talk about Klarna a bit because it's exploded recently, and people have been saying on TikTok and other places that Klarna's actually being destroyed because it had a bad quarter. Even if Klarna went down, other apps would take its place, and there are other apps anyway that do the same thing. Klarna doubles losses in first quarter as IPO remains on hold. So Klarna saw its losses jump in the first quarter as the popular buy now, pay later firm applies the brakes on a hotly anticipated US initial public offering. The Swedish payment startup said its net loss for the first 3 months of 2025 totaled $99 million, significantly worse than the $47 million reported a year ago. Klarna said this was due to several one-off costs related to depreciation, share-based payments, and restructuring. Revenues at the firm increased 13% year over year to $701 million. Klarna said it now had 100 million active users and 724,000 merchant partners globally. It comes as Klarna remains in pause mode regarding its IPO. And Klarna CEO, who we're going to talk about, Sebastian Siemiatkowski, said the company was able to shrink its headcount by 40% in part due to investments due to AI. The most dystopian thing was DoorDash partnered with Klarna, I think it was 2023, which allowed you to pay in full or pay later, with David Sykes, the chief commercial officer at Klarna, saying, "Our partnership with DoorDash marks an important milestone in Klarna's expansion into everyday spending categories. By offering smarter, more flexible payment solutions for groceries, takeout, and retail essentials, we're making convenience even more accessible for millions of Americans." And yeah, he's not wrong about that. You are making it more accessible. You're doing it by preying on the poorest people. You're preying on people who probably don't have great financial literacy, and maybe people impoverished who want to keep up with the overconsumption lifestyle in the West, by offering them essentially a noose around their necks, being like, "Go on, why don't you defer your Big Mac into 4 payments? And don't worry, if you can't actually pay for it, we're just going to charge late fees, and you could actually ruin your ability to even buy a house one day just because you've been doing this." Because yes, lots of people who do buy now, pay later, they're not doing it because they're trying to build some sort of credit score and show banks they can pay back things. They're doing it because they don't fucking have the money. Like, sure, maybe someone wants to buy something expensive, and this happens already, like buying a sofa or buying something for the kitchen, buying something more necessary, or buying like a new bed or whatever, and you don't have the money up front, or you don't want to take that hit up front, so you space it across like 4 or 5, 6 payments or whatever, right? But applying that to fast food and consumer goods is insane and insanely predatory, because most of the people doing that are people who can't fucking afford it, in my opinion. Now, also, just some facts from Resolver News. A 2025 survey by LendingTree found that 41% of buy now, pay later users report making a late payment in the past year, up from 34% the previous year. So, a 7% jump in 1 year. Do we think this is going to get worse or it's going to get better? But now let's talk about the people who use Klarna. Now, there is a cultural element to this. I'm going to talk about the more important thing of like poverty and like even needing to use things like Klarna to buy basic necessities. But there's another element that I want to talk about, is there is brainwashing under consumer capitalism. That is what consumer capitalism is. It's psychological warfare to make you want to buy things you don't fucking need. That goes back even to the days of like, even in Mad Men, they talk about this. Don Draper literally talks about how his whole like job is designed to like manipulate you into buying shit you don't need. But that is part of it. And sometimes when I go onto TikTok, it's like I'm going into a different world. Like, I don't use TikTok. I don't post on TikTok. I never browse TikTok, but I do use it for videos occasionally. So this is one of the videos I used it for. So I go on it and I see all these people talking about Klarna, all these memes about Klarna, and all these memes about consumption. I'm just like, holy shit, like, I'm in such a bubble sometimes with this stuff. I don't think I truly appreciate how much overconsumption has just rotted Gen Z brains. How many of them are just on these apps, spending money they don't have on the most stupid shit. Like, I understand it sometimes for something more long term, like a video games console, but using buy now, pay later for takeaways and shoes, I don't get it. So you have things like this. No judgment between us girls. How much do you have on Klarna right now? People saying 1,400. Someone saying £1,000, 1,300. In the past, £500, £700. Now, if you own Klarna or any of these buy now, pay later apps, like over £1,000, right? And you haven't bought something, like I said, like maybe a new bed or a new couch or something that is like pretty expensive, and I can understand you not wanting to take that massive hit to your bank account straight away, right? Using these apps to rack up so much debt is just like such a terrible idea. And the ease of access that anyone can open these accounts pretty much is absurd, because you were just preying on people having that, paying the late fees, not being able to even pay back these things in the first place. And sure, some people never pay it back, and some people get away with it as well. But these companies don't care because they also have all that fucking debt to play with as well. So Klarna doesn't give a shit that a lot of people can't pay it back. And also, all the data they're selling about your spending habits to these other companies and third-party companies, there's so much money to be made that on the surface, it might not look like they could sustain themselves, because if the economy is getting worse and less people are being able to even pay back their loans and stuff, then surely this isn't sustainable. But I don't think it really matters. Most people will still be paying it back with interest, and you can generate so much more revenue from all the other stuff that taking the hit, which they expect to take from people not being able to pay back in full or even at all, they know it's going to happen and they don't really give a shit. Also, 2 more TikToks. I found this bizarre. It's just a random guy talking about using Klarna for takeaways, and this mindset is just insane to me. I've never used credit cards. I've never used buy now, pay later. If I want to buy something expensive, I just want to have the money in my account, right? And I save my money, and I've always been good with that. And yeah, it sucks to take hits. Like, I'm thinking about right now, I might need to buy a new computer soon. I'm looking at like over £1,000 at least, pretty much. And I could definitely justify doing a buy now, pay later for that. But I'd rather just buy it outright. And also, I would only do that if I know I have enough savings after the fact. But using Klarna for shit like takeaways, again, the mindset around this is insane. Because if you're saying, well, the takeaway is too expensive for me to even really think about right now, I'm going to spread the payments over a couple months. I just don't think you have a good relationship with money at all. And you're going to get yourself into way more problems by doing shit like this, even though you think it's a bit of a throwaway thing. Like, I'm doing this for a takeaway. I think it's just like a recipe for disaster.
I'm just finding out that people don't use Klarna to get takeaways. I thought that was like a normal thing, but I've just seen a post on Facebook completely shading anybody who does that, and everyone's like mocking it and laughing at it like, oh my god, do people actually do that? Bitch, yes! Listen, when you're a broke fat person, you will find ways and means to get takeaways, pizzas, kebabs, wraps, delicious shit like that, and I'm not paying £40 in one go. Absolutely not. That bitch can get put on a Klarna plan and I'll pay £10 a month. Maybe it's, I mean, not to be ageist, but maybe it's like a generational thing. Maybe older people wouldn't really do that, but I feel like there's probably a lot of people that are my age, in their 20s or younger, that probably do that, because listen, £40+ is a lot of money to spend on one meal, a takeaway, and it's a lot to come out of your account at one time. Maybe I'm just really stingy, but yeah, no, I'd rather spread the cost. I'll spread the cost of my pizza, thank you.
So that just touches on a lot of things I've been saying, and it's really like the consumer addiction. Because if you said to me, this takeaway that used to be kind of cheap back in the day, you're going to have to pay £40 for that takeaway. And if I don't think I can afford that, I'm not buying that takeaway. And I probably wouldn't buy a takeaway just for myself that costs £40 anyway, because that's like absolutely insane. I obviously don't know what's going on in this guy's life. He's saying like he wants these things, but it doesn't have to be food. It could be anything. And people, because of the hell that is just capitalist and Western capitalist life, you can understand why people do this. Because at the worst, life is really hard. It's hard to deal with, and it's very soul crushing. But I don't know about you. I'm 29. I speak to a lot of my friends, and even if they're doing financially well, and a lot of them are financially better than me as well, what they often say is they just hate their jobs. And they don't hate it because they hate it because of any particular reason to do with the actual work. It's just like you get to that stage in your life of, oh yeah, capitalism is just a fucking prison. I'm working 40 hours a week, every single week. I'm always tired. I never have time for myself. It never stops. And I'm getting older, and I can feel how it's just like eating away at my soul. And I never wanted to do this. And I never wanted to have a life like this where I'm essentially a slave to this system. And now people I know are getting like houses and mortgages. So you're really locked in now. And the bank and the job owns your life. And I can understand how in that, even if you're doing financially well, distraction through consumer spending is appealing. Now, if you're doing worse and you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're spending all your money on absurd rents, and here is a service that allows you to buy the nice things, as he says in the video, could be nice food, could be video games, could be whatever, you understand why people do that. Klarna and these other apps just obviously exploit this overconsumption, consumer capitalism delusion where everyone is brainwashed to want just random shit all the time. We're so addicted to it, and that's how they make their money, because people can't help themselves. And also, when we live in a society that is so hooked on this shit, you don't want to be the one who has to go without. So that's why across class lines, we are still all consuming. But what's happening now, as the wealth gap increases, is the middle class and upper class can still consume like normal, but the people living paycheck to paycheck, well, we want to do that as well. And how do we do that? Klarna. We get loans to buy Uber Eats and shit like that. And we think it's normal, and we normalize it to ourselves. And especially in this case, it's just someone I feel like who's just given in to like mass consumption and maybe is using food to cope with something because it doesn't seem like healthy finances to do shit like that. But that's a more like throwaway thing where he is more like embracing it, I guess, in terms of he's not he doesn't have any shame around it. He's posting it on TikTok. But then I found another TikTok about someone responding to someone saying, I buy all my groceries on Instacart using Klarna. Groceries are so expensive. I have 9 and owe $800 total dollars. I thought I was the only one and was so embarrassed to have used it so much.
Girl, I just wanted to hop on here real quick. You are not alone. The overwhelming amount of people that message me, comment, we're all struggling. Yeah, do I make more money? Yeah, but I don't own any of it. So I'm struggling too. I've used Affirm and Klarna for groceries, my daughter's glasses, my daughter's school, toll bills. I had a car issue. I've used it for all kinds of things. Now, I've used it for a lot of stupid stuff too. But I've used it for needs. And I don't let anybody in the comment section on this page.
So that's obviously like the really bleak side. We're going to see people increasingly use these services to pay for everyday needs. And if you are struggling to pay for your basic necessities, you're having to take out loans to pay for them, it stands to reason you probably won't be able to pay those loans back. So you're just kicking the can down the road, which, of course you're going to do whatever you have to do to survive. But that's why this system is so predatory. People used to use credit cards for stuff like this, but now you can get this so easy that if you need to survive, of course you're going to take advantage of it. No one should be having to borrow money to pay for food or pay for the basic necessities. No one should have to do that. But that's the capitalist solution. They see an opportunity of, people are struggling in the cost of living crisis, which is the most dystopian thing I've ever heard being normalized. Well, let's not give them better food programs, better government assistance. Let's let private corporations lend them money easier to make huge profits while these people just spiral into more and more debt, where in the American context, where these things are even more popular, it's going to basically ruin their entire life forever. And it's going to affect their ability down the road for a lot of them to even get housing, even if they claw their way out of the poverty where they have to use things like Klarna to even buy groceries. So to tie this all back into AI and stuff, right? And how the CEO of Klarna doesn't even realize he's part of the problem. Randomly, he just talked about like AI the other day, and he's talked about how with Klarna that they've used AI to replace jobs, but he's framing it in more of a positive way because he's acted like it's been a long-term strategy of the company in that they've stopped hiring people like a year ago. They started using AI and they pay their employees more while not growing the employee base and stuff like that. So I think he's probably full of shit. But he did say something interesting about how AI is taking people's jobs and it's going to keep taking over white-collar jobs. Now, when you say white-collar, lots of people immediately think of like the wealthiest people, but if you've gone to university and you've got a grad job, you often work in white-collar industries and you're not paid that much. But increasingly, even those jobs are being taken by AI. So what do you do with people who can't afford to live? And what do you do with people who can't get jobs anymore because AI has taken over their sector or whatever? Now, the Klarna CEO has a decent enough idea for someone who owns a company like Klarna. So listen to what he has to say about it.
I use Brussels as an example. There are 8,000 people in Brussels employed by the EU to do translations, which unfortunately basically are redundant today to some degree. You could obviously argue that they need to quality assure and so forth, but not the full 8,000. And I think from a society perspective, politicians should ask themselves, what can we do? Because I think if you're on the right wing of the political spectrum, you'll be like, oh, there's always going to be new jobs. Yeah, but if you're a 55-year-old translator in Brussels, you may not become a YouTube influencer tomorrow. So I think you need an answer for those people. And I think that answer maybe is something along the lines that if you lose your jobs because of AI, you get the same income as a retirement plan. But if you then choose to go and do some other job, then you lose that. So I think this will become a very acute question within the term of our current politicians. I think it's in that time frame we're talking in the coming few years.
So basically what he's advocating for is kind of like a form of UBI. Now you guys might think that's weird as some guy who is in charge of a company like Klarna, but like I've always argued, UBI is a bandage for consumer capitalism, right? So in the example he gave there, a 55-year-old translator working for the EU in Brussels, right? He gets made redundant at 55 and he's struggling to find a job because that's his whole career. Now it's been taken over by AI. So you pay him the same income. You pay him the same income because what will he do with that income? Well, the same thing he was doing before. He'll spend it on the basic necessities of life, but also on consumer capitalism. And that's good for companies like him. But also, I'm sure he realizes this as well. Well, okay, that guy in Brussels who loses his job, right, can't find another job. So what does he need now? He needs money. Now, he might have an early retirement, but that's not going to cover everything at 55. So what does he have to do? He could take out credit card loans, or he could also use services like Klarna to buy stuff, where he can spread the costs over months. So even though this guy is saying there needs to be some sort of reckoning on how AI is taking over jobs, at the same time, with AI taking over jobs more and more, where would that shepherd people to? Services like Klarna. So AI taking the jobs is directly beneficial for people like him because, yes, he's saying something I'm saying as well. If AI is taking jobs, and especially important jobs like translating and stuff like that, then what happens to the people who lose their jobs? Under socialism, or even under like a social democracy, you would still give those people money because you can't just have people having no means to make a living anymore. We don't live in a global social democracy. We don't live under socialism. There is no regulation on this AI stuff at the moment, and I doubt there's going to be because of the system we live in. So what's going to happen is that guy just doesn't have a job, and he's going to have to retrain. Or what's easy right now? What can anyone go and do? Uber Eats. So more people are going to be put into those industries, and I'm sure the gig economy will open up to even more things that people can just go and do. So what you have is essentially no real barriers to using Klarna, becoming an Uber driver, becoming an Uber Eats driver, and everyone who's so desperate is going to go do that, and they're going to be using Klarna to subsidize their lifestyle. So that is the new slavery we're entering, and that is going to become an increasing problem. We already see it. And we already in our heads, we think, oh, that's not a problem because my Uber driver is a migrant, or my Uber driver is a refugee, or my Uber Eats driver is a refugee from a different demographic than me. In this country, obviously, you have the stereotype of, oh, it's like a Muslim refugee. In Ireland, it's like, oh, it's a Brazilian man doing it. And you think it's some sort of other, some sort of lesser being than you who's doing these jobs that you will never have to do. But trust me, with AI and the way capitalism is going, we are all very close to being in the circumstances like being a new refugee to the UK, having to make a living by whatever means possible. And that is why it's just so depressing to think about the future, because the AI bubble we've seen recently, they're talking about it bursting, it doesn't fucking matter because the hype has just overtaken everyone as they've planned, and the government, especially the UK government, has just gone full in on AI without thinking about the societal repercussions, while also cutting the welfare state and basically continuing Tory austerity. I'm sure some countries will start implementing things like he said. Will they do that in the UK or the US? 100%, 1000%, no they won't. If AI takes your job, go get another one. Oh wait, there aren't many jobs anymore. Go work in the gig economy, which will still be fine because of things like Klarna. And that's what it's doing. Instead of UBI being the prop for consumer capitalism, which I thought it would be, Klarna and buy now, pay later and loans are going to be the bandage for consumer capitalism until it's no longer tenable. It's just going to keep going and going and going until some breaking point. It's on life support right now, but the life support is not UBI, it's loans. And it's loans for people who can't afford them and can't afford to pay for them, and also now being used by people who are desperate to survive, because capitalist governments and capitalism doesn't give a fuck about the individual or humanity. It only cares about profit, and it's unemotional about that. It doesn't give a shit how many people are killed by that. That's all capitalism cares about. So very depressing, but let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.